Hi, Science 7. Topic 3 is on erosion and weathering and how that changes the surface of our beautiful planet. And you should know that erosion is that movement of rocks, minerals, soil from one spot to another spot. And there is 4 agents of erosion or ways that erosion happen. Our first one is glaciers that had very long ago covered most of our hemisphere and our northern hemisphere. And so you can see here during the Ice Age that North America was almost completely covered. Europe, huge part of it was covered, a bit of Asia, and this is the other chunk of North America there, and even some of South America. So that is taking a look at those sheets of ice that were working to change the crust. And those glaciers acted like bulldozers, basically, and they scrubbed as they moved, leaving scratches on the earth called striations. And there are 3 kinds of landforms that formed because of that. Moraines is the first kind, and that's the piles of rock that, here's the, by the way, the stripes or scratches that are formed. Moraines are the piles of rocks that are pushed up as the glacier flows. It, need a darker color here. As the glacier flows, it is scraping and pushing against the rocks, and as it recedes and melts back, this moraine is the pile of rocks that are left at the end, and sometimes they're left on the side as well. There could be side moraines. So that rock pile would look like that. Erratics are these really large rocks that are left behind. So the glacier would grab them up and move them as the glacier is flowing, and then leave behind these big rocks as it recedes back. So you may see these rocks in the middle of nowhere sometimes and know that those are erratics left behind by glaciers. The third type of way that the glaciers change the face of the earth is by making these U-shaped valleys. And basically that is carved out by a glacier that once existed there, and as it melted back, it carved out this big valley in the shape of a U. And you can imagine how the glacier had filled that space at one time and scraped it out as it went. It's like as if you took your fist and scraped out a groove in the sand, if you remember playing in the sand. Okay, another gravitational force here is another way that our planet has changed, and gravity pulls things down, like landslides, for example. And so we can check out this Switzerland landslide video, but we also have, not so far from us, this historical event about the Frank slide that happened 1903, where 80 million tons of rock crashed down Turtle Mountain, and about 70 people perished in this town of Frank. And if you've ever driven past there, there is a very historical monument there, and you can see the rubble that's still left behind. Okay, third agent of erosion is wind. And you can feel how powerful wind can be, and see how it can damage structures and how it can blow particles. And when it blows particles that scratch stuff, that's called abrasion. And to stop this, we know that planting trees will hold down soil. Contour farming or strip farming, where you have one kind of plant and another kind of plant next to it, helps to stop the wind. And of course, reduce tillage. So zero tillage is a farming practice where you don't cultivate, you leave your stubble standing over the winter after you harvest, so that it holds down your topsoil. Water is another agent of erosion. and it's a very strong agent. If you can think of crashing waves and how that can erode the shoreline, carves out canyons, and can really change the appearance of that area over time. If you think of rivers, they often wind like this. It's called meandering. And if you check out a map, pretty much all rivers will meander. And what's happening there is that as it's flowing, the outside of that river is actually cutting away at the shoreline, and the inside edge is depositing. So that's why over time it does leave this carve that goes deeper and deeper on the outside, and this pile of sediment on the inside of a curve. And eventually, if you've ever played with making meandering rivers, like in maybe on a beach, you may notice that because there's this carving out process that happens here, you can see it on some of the videos, eventually this can carve through and actually flow straight through and leave behind this little lake. And this is called an oxbow lake. Oxbow Lake. And it's very visible as well on a map. Many places that have rivers that have been there a long time, you'll see evidence of little oxbow lakes in different places that formed because of the erosion that was happening over time on that inside edge. So that's a pretty cool formation. And you can see things like this, that water has eroded these big rocks. And you can also see, if you have photographs sometimes of how they looked years ago, there's definitely very clear evidence that erosion keeps changing the rock formation. So we're going to move on to weathering. And weathering is changes that happen over many, many years. And for example, wind and water can change the face of the planet. For example, wind can just blast and change it very gradually. Great glaciers, that happens over a long period of time. And weathering can also happen very quickly, like when the rock slide causes an immediately, or a flood that causes an immediate change to the Earth's surface. And weathering can be because of 3 different causes. And basically the breakdown of the Earth is weathering, and the moving it from one place to another place is erosion. So when we think back to the topic of where we started off with erosion, just remember that erosion is when those granules or pieces of the earth move. Weathering is the breaking down. So the breaking down of those pieces is the weathering part. And so there's, first of all, mechanical weathering. So breaking down because of wind or water or gravity or even temperature change. So any mechanical force that breaks it up would be mechanical weathering. Frost wedging is one of those types, and basically when water goes into a rock and freezes, it expands, and when it freezes, and as that expansion can actually break a little bigger cracks in the rock and break it apart over time. And yes, this would happen in our area, in Edmonton area, because we have these freezing temperatures. So water getting into a crack can basically frost wedge it apart. And sedimentation will involve deposits of little pieces of rock, and then they'll accumulate and fall to the bottom in the water. Second kind of weathering involves chemicals, and this is where there's a bit of a reaction with either the gases or the chemicals in the water, and things like pollution going into the air can get poured down with or mixed with water, and it'll pour down with rain or even hail or sleet, and come down as acid rain. So all pollutants going out of the smokestacks, if it rains that down, it mixes and can come down as sulfuric acid, nitric acid, carbonic acid. So those acids will fall and can be doing some chemical weathering when they land. And two kinds of rocks that are affected by acid rain are limestone and dolomite, and you can even add marble to that, because marble steps, marble statues will get worn away by acid rain, because the acid will make it bubble and wear it away. So as we get these pollutants going up out of the smokestack, if they join with precipitation, they'll come down as acid rain. And not only will it dissolve some of these rocks like limestone, dolomite, or marble, but also acid rain can kill plant life and cause some things like fish not able to hatch their eggs, or there'll be vegetation that basically gets their needles of pine trees that get kind of burnt from the acid. It can interfere with all sorts of reproduction of different water creatures and land creatures. Okay, biological weathering. This is when living organisms like plants and bacteria can break down our Earth's crust. So if you think of lichens, which is a fungus and algae that lives together that makes this kind of a crusty looking thing on a rock, that's a lichen, and it produces acids. So those will wear down that rock a little bit, which is the start of how soil is formed. So if you think of going to the mountains and you realize that there are actually trees growing on those mountains, but the mountains are actually rock, it happened in this way that lichens, first of all, with their acids, made a little bit of soil, which caused something to be able to grow there, which then died and started making a soil layer. So eventually there's enough of a soil layer for bigger and bigger vegetation to grow. The roots are very powerful. That's another biological weathering agent, because they can very quickly get through all sorts of places like sidewalks and crack that open, and into the rock and crack that open. So speaking of sidewalk cracks, mechanical weathering, like some force like an earthquake, can crack sidewalks, and so can plant roots, which is a type of biological weathering. And that's in the two pictures here. And that wraps up our topic 3. You can take a look at Bill Nye and